keynote address by Stanley Wang, founder at Illuminati Technology Limited. And our topics of discussion today is how different types of data sources, ranging from social media to location tracking, are going to be used by companies to keep workplaces COVID-19 safe. And I will give a brief word to Stanley to introduce himself. Stanley, can you join us?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Stanley Wang. I'm actually based in Bangkok, Thailand, and I'm the founder of Illuminati Technology, which is focused on providing solutions to keep workplaces disease-free using some of these technologies that we're going to be talking about this afternoon.
Thank you. And could you start sharing the screen with us so that we could see your presentation?
Yes. Just my sharing here. Just hang on a second here. If you can see.
Yeah, just share it full screen. And after your presentation, we'll have a brief Q&A session before we close the event.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm actually going to speak not just about COVID, but actually to talk about thinking beyond COVID-19. I know right now this is probably the thing that has been affecting a lot of companies and a lot of people in a very direct way. But I think that this is a very interesting time to actually look at where some of the focus of the technology and the intersection between that and the disease challenges are going to be taking us going forward. Because I'm based in Bangkok, I think I would be remiss if I didn't state a little bit of information about how things are in Thailand. Thailand actually was the first country outside of China to record a COVID-19 case on January 13th. This is the statistics as of this morning, so slightly over 3,000 cases in total. So Thailand is a country of about 70 million people, but overall, I would say as compared to a lot of other countries, it has had a pretty good record in terms of controlling the outbreak. It has a very strong public health system, which I think if you look by comparison here, this is not meant to sort of say one country is better or worse than another, but I think it's a very interesting one where Thailand overall I think has had both in terms of deaths per million population and in terms of cases per million population. This is a graph which is both logarithmic on both axes. Thailand has been one of the, I would say, good performers. I think that although a lot of other countries may have gotten more attention and Thailand has been a little bit under the radar, I thought I would actually just point that out to this audience here. I think that for those that know Thailand or have been here before, it receives over 40 million tourists a year. It's a very open and it's a international transportation hub. So I think all things considered, it has done actually fairly well during this pandemic. One of the interesting and maybe unexpected cameos in this pandemic has been the discussion around contact tracing. And I think the sudden interest in the use of tracking technology, especially with mobile smartphone apps and contact tracing, which is really one of the old line standard, public health disease control measures has been a very interesting one. It has actually been used really for quite a long time, in particular in things such as for infectious diseases, for sexually transmitted infections, syphilis, and so on, where it's actually a process that's conducted by interview, sometimes face-to-face, sometimes by telephone, and it's a process of interview and recall. And through that process, then the person who has been infected then recalls other contacts that they've had in the past, and those people are then contacted, and then by doing so, then to establish sort of to identify and to quarantine or to treat all the people who have been in contact with that person. The use of apps and use of smartphones as a location tracking is a relatively new feature. This is not an anonymous procedure, by the way. It is confidential, but it is not anonymous. And up to this point, it's not really been used for infectious disease control. In respiratory diseases, which are those that are like influenza. And the reason is because oftentimes with influenza, the people who are infected from or who get infection don't know each other, because it's somebody that you may have just passed by in an area. They are strangers, and so contact tracing in those situations doesn't have as much effectiveness, because oftentimes you don't know who you may have come in contact with. So the use of contact tracing apps to essentially detect whether or not somebody has been in close enough proximity for a period of time long enough to transmit is really kind of a new, this is a little bit of a new concept. And what we're seeing right now is a proliferation of proximity-based contact tracing, and I think some of you have, or a lot of you may have heard about the iOS Android cross-platform contact tracing protocol. This uses Bluetooth Low Energy and essentially uses your smartphone as a beacon, and broadcasts an identifier to other phones that are in that proximity. No location data is exchanged, and because of the sensitivity regarding data privacy and user privacy, the users are actually in control of whether or not to broadcast their disease status. That doesn't mean that if they broadcast their disease status that we know who they are, but they have the right not to do so. There is no privileged access for public health authorities, and I think this is one of the chief sort of concerns that some of the public health authorities have expressed regarding this protocol. And what we're seeing is that a lot of authorities instead are opting to build alternative systems. So I think there's a major debate, and I'm not actually going to be going into that, regarding whether or not centralized or decentralized systems and the degree to which people have some control over their data. But it is probably not going to have a major impact, likely on the course of the disease itself. But I think it does open up a very interesting debate because we're really seeing now sort of explicitly the data subjects, the public, you and I, are now sort of part of the decision, the gatekeeping for how the data is going to be used. So I think this is not the last word on this. I think over time we'll start to see more models evolve that will figure out how to balance the public health requirements against the user data privacy issues. One of the things we're interested in from a data perspective is how do various epidemic control measures and how effective they are in different circumstances. And in fact, there's no specific, there's no one sort of rule about what works best in every circumstance, and it really depends on the specific nature and the type of pathways of transmission that a specific disease has. But one of the things we can do is that we can use these new data sources to help try to model the way that the epidemics will develop, and also to measure or model how the impact of various social restrictions have in slowing down or even bringing disease to a halt. One of the things that we're doing in Thailand right now, and this is just a kind of a short video example, is we integrate data that we can use from different types of social media, geospatial mapping information, and epidemiological information, and integrate that in a way that allows us to be able to identify and create risk maps. And when we can do that, then we can essentially use, even in the absence of very specific, where, for example, with COVID, there's a fair amount of asymptomatic transmission. We don't actually know how much of it, and there's certainly a great deal of pre-symptomatic transmission. But what we can do is we can create a shadow risk map by using this information where we can infer certain types of behaviors by different types of individuals, by age group, by whether or not they're locals or they're tourists, and then cross-match those against the way that people, what their activities are, and then create some type of risk scoring. And we're doing this now with some companies in Thailand, where they can use this as a way to maintain sort of workplace safety without compromising their employees' privacy. I think that one of the things that is probably going to become a more explicit feature in business continuity planning is going to be disease exclusion, and this is going to be to keep workplaces disease-free, production facilities, protecting supply chains and consumer health. We see this, right now, as the world has both become more globalized, and also where the efficiencies or the pursuit of very lean inventory, very just-in-time deliveries has not come without a cost, and the cost is that the system is more fragile, and therefore interruptions of that. Of those supply chains or interruptions of those activities then can in fact bring a business to a halt. I'm going to actually now talk a little bit about something which is not about human disease. We tend to focus on diseases that affect human health, but in fact, another major area are non-human diseases, and in particular diseases that affect the food supply. So this one is a African swine fever. It is a fever. It is a virus that's endemic to Eastern Europe, and it's essentially a disease which kills pigs. Domesticated pigs in particular. The fatality rate, the mortality rate is about 100%, and most pigs that get infected die about a week after being infected. So half of the world's swine herds are in China. China is both the largest producer and the largest consumer of pork products. And ASF was first detected in China last year, 2019, and it is highly infectious. It came from Europe to northern China, and then it was not detected that quickly, and then it rapidly started to infect herds throughout the country, starting from the north and then moving towards the south. And this had an immediate impact, both in terms of the liquidation of swine herds, right, because of the fact that a lot of the producers or the farmers had to slaughter their pig herds, and also as a result of that, it had a significant price impact, and then that is still feeding through this year. So, so the control of disease, transmission from one part of the world to another is important, not just for human health, but for the food supply. Okay. This is an interesting graphic. I'm not going to talk about this one specifically, but Rabobank has, if you have an interest, has a series of really terrific graphics on how food is traded across the globe. This is actually the seafood trade, and we can see here that South America and China and Europe are key sort of players in that. What I'm going to talk about, however, is a different food, and that are bananas, which may sound a little bit strange, but it goes to show sort of the importance of disease control. So bananas are the world's most traded fruit. The global trade's worth about $8 billion a year. Most people probably know that it is essentially a single variety of banana called the Cavendish that accounts for almost all of the traded product, and about 4/5 of that come from, or global exports originate from Latin America. Ecuador is about 1/3 of the world trade by itself. It became the Cavendish itself dominates the world trade because it was a variety that was supposed to be resistant to Panama disease, which is a wilting disease called Fusarium. But in the 1970s, in Taiwan, certain Cavendish bananas were detected. They detected this Panama disease, and for about 20 years, what we saw is that the disease spread very slowly, and it wasn't until about 2010 that the disease sort of broke out of Southeast Asia. And what we see now is that it has gradually sort of moved towards the West. And last year, it finally reached Colombia. It is a disease which is not treatable. There are no fungicides. There are no chemical treatments that are able to control it. So now, having reached essentially the major production areas for this variety, the actual future of the Cavendish banana is actually under threat, because Cavendish is a clone, which means that every Cavendish banana is essentially genetically identical. So it doesn't have any genetic variation that would provide it with any natural resistance to it. So this is the type of situation, again, where tracking data would allow us to be able to help prevent some of this type of potential outcome. Okay. And it's not just disease. I think some of you may have heard about these giant hornets that come from Japan and from China. These are hornets which are, if they attack European honeybee hives, and a single hornet can in fact destroy an entire hive. They reached France in a shipment of pottery in about 15 years ago, and then last year was detected also on the U.S. and Canada West Coast. So again, because European honeybees don't have any natural defenses against this particular variety of hornet work versus Asian bees, which have evolved, co-evolved with these hornets and therefore know how to defend themselves against this. And so this potentially has a major impact on pollination crops as well. So again, just something to kind of widen the context of the conversation regarding technology. Is not simply just for to control human diseases, but really to protect our food supply as well. So what we're really focused on are when we look at sort of the different sort of ways that disease is transmitted. You said on the left you have the pathogens and you have the vectors of transmission, and in the localized settings, either being infecting people or infecting livestock or plants or soil, depending on what type of a microbe they are. But we're really interested, I think, in the secondary or the long distance infections, and this is where the semi-processed products, animal feeds, or transportation vehicles, when they travel across the globe, then we're really that's really where it's important to try to figure out how we can control these these movements, or at least track these movements. And if we can identify where these products have been or where they originated from, then we have a much better chance of controlling the spread of these diseases. Okay. So I think looking at this here, and we obviously would, there's an issue of balancing individual data privacy. That obviously is something that doesn't apply to animals. It doesn't apply to products or to transportation, but location detection and particular transnational location tracking. We have to be able to have continuity across borders, to be able to have full visibility of objects or animals or products, really from their origin to at every point, to be able to understand sort of where they may have been potentially in an at-risk area. Biologic tagging or sensors. There are this is still probably not feasible at the level that is needed. The costs need to come down in order for this to become viable. Upstream food traceability, and then the application of geospatial risk mapping. This is useful for epidemiological prediction, the use of environmental data, and also incorporating climate change. Climate change does actually change the range of the natural range of a lot of wildlife and insects, and that's something that has a major impact on the risk. So I think, and then we can use geofencing, we can use location tracking technologies, and then we also have a natural language processing capability. We haven't applied it in this case, but for example, where there are wildlife field data reports, localized disease reports, to be able to very quickly incorporate that and convert that into a data form that allows us to be able to to add those to the risk mapping is also something that I think will become more common in the future. So this is a very exciting and very interesting area that I think has will get a lot more attention, and I think that we'll definitely be looking at this at much greater integration of some of these new techniques with with disease, with public health and with disease control, and I think that the private sector organizations are probably increasingly going to need to build in their own processes and control technologies to keep their own businesses running and operating during these types of outbreaks and epidemics. So that is pretty much all I had to say. I don't know if that's too long or too short, but anyway, this is just some ways that you could reach me if anybody has any interest in this.
Thank you very much, Stanley. So what currently, who are the current clients of yours for these technologies? And do you have any fundraising plans in the near future?
Yeah, so we're for example working with in Thailand at the moment with a large security company. They provide guard services to clients throughout Thailand. And so they have a workforce that is in many different locations. And so in this particular situation, what we provide is a way for them to understand the risk of their employees potentially being exposed to COVID-19 from outside the workplace. Okay, but to do so in a way that is not intrusive on or compromise their own privacy. So what this does is it allows them to be able to be sure that they're not introducing infection into their clients' areas, because some of their customers are high security clients, and so this is something that's a major priority for them. Another one is a conglomerate company. This is they are looking at protecting their headquarters environment, and again, because they're in Thailand, the people live in very, I would say, heterogeneous living circumstances. Some people live in very crowded conditions. Some people live in their own homes, etc. And they have also very different social and behavioral sort of activities. And it's very difficult for a company to be able to to be able to control that. And right now, most companies rely on temperature screening. This company does. Most companies here, all companies here, actually have to do temperature screening. But because this particular disease also has a fair amount of asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic carriers who do shed the virus, so it is not sufficient to just rely on temperature screening alone. We are currently in discussions with another company that is a biomedical company that has a high security requirement as well. So we will be looking for some additional capital going forward. This is not the only product that we have, but this is something that I think I'm discussing today, which is relevant to to a lot of people's lives at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. So do you plan your expansion abroad also to work with other countries across the world?
Yes, we are. We are, in fact, right now exploring a marketing partnership in the United States. Right now, I think looking at the US, we see that because it's unlike Thailand, there's probably going to be the country's going to be living with the disease for at least some time until the vaccine is is approved. And so right now we're currently looking at the U.S. as our sort of first major sort of international market.
Do you currently plan any fundraising rounds for your own company? And what is your strategy if that's the case?
Yes, the answer is yes, we will. We are going to be within, I would say, within the next quarter, be looking at raising some additional capital. We have actually been funding this internally, with our core shareholders, but we will be looking externally within the next 2 or 3 months. Yes.
And do you plan any specific strategies for fundraising in the current period? Because mostly people are now dealing with online Zoom meetings with their investors, and some of 40% in VC markets at times being funded through internet connections rather than offline meetings.
Well, I think we're trying to get used to this as well. So, it's always more challenging to sort of do this on a purely online basis. And I think we appreciate the opportunity, at least, to have the conversation on this platform. I think this is very interesting, and hopefully, we'll be also looking at this as a way for us to present this, what we're doing through this platform as well. So, so I'm using this as well as a learning, as a learning opportunity as well.
And what are your key milestones you're planning to achieve for your own company in the next half a year?
I think we're going to be looking at by the end of this year, I would like to have some corporate customers outside of Thailand, and I think that would be within the region. I think because COVID at least is a challenge that every country effectively is facing. So to a certain extent, I think we have a lot of different potential sort of directions from a geographic perspective that we can go, but they all sort of center around a very similar sort of core set of technologies or competences, which is mapping and risk algorithms and epidemiological data modeling. So I think whether in Europe or whether the US, I think the US, because we have less of a language issue, it's also a market that has right now, I think, significant challenges. It's a fairly big one. The biggest problem that I think we have right now is that we can't really travel. So we have to develop a strategy or partnership approach that allows us to work with partners in the US, but without actually having much direct interaction with, we don't have a real opportunity to meet them. And I think the restrictions on travel and how international travel will resume is actually going to be one of the more complicated things. And I'm actually not sure exactly how each country is going to be approaching that. I think there's different discussions about countries with similar levels of COVID risk essentially being able to travel between themselves. So countries with very low levels of COVID risk may open corridors with each other. Countries with moderate levels may do the same as well. But it I think is going to be it's still very complicated because we don't really have a consensus yet in terms of how people can fly, whether middle seats are kept open, whether they can serve food, how strictly are masks can be enforced, and until those are really worked out and ironed out, it's going to be very difficult to figure out sort of how people can travel. I know some of the airports that have started to resume flights in some countries, the process is to go into the to check in are extremely cumbersome right now, and so this is something that I think is still a major is still a major barrier to real travel. Are people going to be required to quarantine at the arrival destination, for 14 days or so on? Those are things that still are hard to.
What would be your key message to our audiences, which are mostly serial entrepreneurs and VC investors, how to make this transition to the post-COVID more smoothly in terms of their organizations and maybe how to protect their own teams in the current environment?
I think the first one is the recognition that just looking at it from a pure biological perspective, that the animal world, whether they're bats or they're rodents or other species, harbor a lot of viruses that are very similar to COVID. The surprising thing is how much disruption this particular virus has had on the world, both financially, economically, socially, but it's not by any means the last. And so there are, I do follow a lot of the studies that are being done, and some of these unfortunately have now been interrupted by for various reasons, that are doing surveys of bats, for example, in Southeast Asia and China and South America, and there's a lot of these viruses which have not yet crossed over to humans, but they're pretty similar, and so we have to be. We have to expect that this will happen again. This should not be thought of as a once in a lifetime or once in a generation or even once in a 10-year occurrence, but it's something that I think has to be now built into our business planning, and I think the type of tools that not just what we're working on, but other other companies, where we can provide sort of ongoing risk monitoring, continuous risk assessment, which happens in the background most of the time. It's not needed, but you want to have that there so that it can be activated, or it can be deployed, or it can be providing data really at a very early stage, because what we see here is that even a week or even 10 days makes a big difference, and being for a disease that is as contagious or infectious as this one is, that small time window can mean the difference between whether or not a company can operate, or has to shut down temporarily. So I think, and right now I think the good thing is that the opportunities to use, whether they're mobile devices and apps or other ways that can be privacy. I would say respectful. I would say not completely zero. There is always going to be some loss of privacy, but it can be done in such a way that it doesn't compromise, I would say, the individual's privacy rights, and yet still provide enough data that would both protect the employer, the workplace, and themselves, because obviously you don't want to bring this disease into your own household.
Thank you so much, Stanley, and please contact Stanley if you have any further questions, and if you need to get more information as for the slideshow Stanley provided. And we welcome you also to join our next events, which are online roadshows, investments and pivots during pandemic, biotech and medtech, which will start at 1 p.m. UK time. Thank you so much, Stanley, and we wish you all the best in terms of your achieving the milestones planned and the fundraising rounds. Thank you.